Tonight, we will share with you some of the findings from the Draft SEIS, and we will provide an opportunity at the end to hear your questions. However, we will not be accepting any public comment or testimony this evening. You can provide public comment anytime online and at some upcoming events, which you will learn about later tonight in our presentation. Before we get started, I would love to introduce you to our panelists and presenters, and we will get started today with Greg Johnson.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Greg Johnson, Interstate Bridge Replacement Program Administrator.
Okay, Chris.
Good evening, Chris Regan, Environmental Manager for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program.
Casey.
Good evening, Casey Lyles. I'm the Delivery Manager for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program.
Shilpa.
Good evening, Shilpa Mallam. I'm the Design Manager for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program.
Ryan.
Good evening, Ryan LaProuse, Transportation Planning Lead for the Interstate Bridge Program.
Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. Rebecca Steiner on the environmental team.
Hannah.
Good evening, Hannah Williams, Interstate Bridge Replacement Public Affairs.
Closed captioning is available in English and Spanish tonight. You can follow the link on the screen and follow the prompts to view both English and Spanish captioning in a separate browser. Through Zoom, you can access closed captioning by the CC icon towards the right side of your screen, and you can follow the prompts from there to receive closed captioning. There will be time at the end of the presentation to respond to your questions. You can use the Q&A feature in Zoom on the lower menu bar and write your question at any time throughout the presentation. Again, we cannot take official public comment this evening. However, we will share with you opportunities to provide that comment in person as well as online. If we run out of time before we can answer your question, please follow up with us by email, and we invite you to sign up for office hours so we can meet with you virtually or in person to respond to your questions. With that, I will turn it over to our program administrator, Greg Johnson.
Once again, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our program overview briefing for how to interact with our environmental impact statement document. So let's go to the next slide, please. Once again, this shows you a picture of a significant part of the project that we're going to be working on, the Interstate Bridge over the Columbia River. And let's go to the next slide, please. So what are the objectives for this briefing? So we are here to provide information to you about the draft Supplemental Environmental Impact Statement document that was released almost 3 weeks ago. We want to give you a high-level overview of the findings in the draft SEIS. It is a very long and complex document with a lot of technical reports that go along with it. So we have experts here tonight who are going to walk you through it. We're also going to talk about how the 60-day public comment period works and how you can provide your comments and provide meaningful comments to the program for us to answer back to you. And last but not least, we'll have some time for question and answers at the end of this briefing period. So next slide, please. So with any project that has federal dollars that goes through the National Environmental Policy Act process, a purpose and need has to be established for that project. So the region has established the purpose and need for this project, and these are the 6 purpose and need statements. And you're going to hear more about them, but they speak to the safety, they speak to impaired freight movement, congestion, earthquake vulnerability, inadequate bike and pedestrian paths, as well as limited public transportation. So these are the reasons why we are studying this corridor to solve these problems. So let's go to the next slide, and that brings my my partner Chris Regan to talk about NEPA. So Chris, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, and as Greg said, for my part tonight, I'm going to jump into a little bit of the background of the National Environmental Policy Act, talk about how IBR entered that, give you an overview of the specific aspects that we're covering within the environmental impact statement, and get you primed to go through the findings that are going to follow there. So to start with, the National Environmental Policy Act, it was one of the first federal planning laws that came into existence in 1970. So it's over 50 years old with a long track record of how to go through and do analysis to ensure two things: that federal agencies assess and disclose those environmental effects of their proposed actions prior to making a decision, and that there is a venue for agencies to consider public comments as part of that decision-making process. And as Greg was mentioning, the documentation, the largest documentation of the National Environmental Policy Act is known as an environmental impact statement. And NEPA forms an umbrella that also ties in a lot of other federal laws, regulations, executive orders. So for example, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, specific policies and standards on evaluating noise and vibration, incorporating climate change analysis, all of that gets pulled into our NEPA documentation. It also incorporates National Historic Preservation Act that evaluates historic and protected areas, archaeological resources, and ensures tribal consultation, as well as the Uniform Relocation Act on residential and commercial displacement, and the Executive Order on Environmental Justice. Next slide, please. But the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program didn't begin an EIS on its own. The Interstate Bridge Replacement Program continued the work that was conducted previously, known as the Columbia River Crossing Project. Now that project began in 2004. It led through a scoping process. Alternatives were evaluated, some were rejected, and it arrived at an EIS that looked at a no-build alternative compared against 4 build alternatives. Just like what we're doing right now, that went out for a draft environmental impact statement. Comments were received. It summarized those comments and made changes in a final, selected a preferred alternative, and then was recorded in a federal record of decision. Again, these are NEPA terms, that recorded the CRC locally preferred alternative to move forward. Unfortunately, in 2014, the project was shelved due to a lack of regional consensus, but the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration record of decision remained, and they continue to be the co-lead agencies for IBR as we're going through NEPA today. Next slide. So why are we looking at a draft supplemental? Part of the conversation that we started having with our federal leads through NEPA were that the transportation challenges that were identified during CRC, the purpose and need, as Greg said, continue to be exist today, and they remain unresolved. Because the purpose and need did not change, that meant that the foundation documents that CRC provided continued to be valid, but we needed to make sure that as we move forward, there had been changed conditions, including physical environment, community priorities, and regulation changes. So we needed to update that. And the National Environmental Policy Act affords for that through a supplemental analysis. So in 2021, the federal lead agencies issued a NEPA reevaluation to assess the extent of those changes. They determined that a supplemental was the right path to identify and disclose the new adverse impacts and any mitigation that was necessary to address the change conditions. And so IBR started out drafting the draft supplemental EIS. Next slide. And as Greg said, every environmental document through NEPA starts with a purpose and a statement of need. IBR continues and pulled forward the Columbia River Crossing's 6 need statements: safety, impaired freight, congestion, earthquake vulnerability, the inadequate active transportation paths, and limited public transportation. We're continue to address those with the modified locally preferred alternative, and that's what we're really talking about today. Next slide. And as we move forward, it's really important as we start talking about findings that there's some specific terms that are really valuable for you to understand. The modified locally preferred alternative is the set of corridor-wide improvements that we're seeking to fulfill the stated purpose and need. The modified locally preferred alternative is being compared against a no-build alternative. And it's a future no-build alternative looking at the year of 2045. It's important to understand that the no-build alternative doesn't mean nothing gets done. If the IBR is not constructed, there will still be needs in the program area, and that would be independent from the IBR program. But also within the modified locally preferred alternative, there's a set of design options. And those would be specific refinements that are considered for specific project components to represent a range of potential options for the design of that component that helps us compare impacts, but then also shows trade-offs for those different design options. Next slide. So within the environmental impact statement, there are 3 general areas of general technical areas that are being evaluated: the transportation, the community, and the environmental technical areas. For transportation, we're looking at transportation networks, including transit, how the highway connects to existing streets, air quality impacts, impacts to aviation, navigation, the effect on energy and greenhouse gas emissions, and noise and vibration. Within community, that includes cultural resources and economics, environmental justice, impacts to land use and neighborhoods, property acquisitions, and public services. And for the environment, that includes looking at climate change, impacts to ecosystems and groundwater, the impacts of the program on visual quality, water quality, as well as wetlands and waters of the state. And I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to our delivery manager, Casey.
Great, thanks, Chris. And I will continue with those who are sharing on the screen as it is now. So I'm going to describe next what is being studied in the draft SEIS, more detailed description of the modified locally preferred alternative. The modified locally preferred alternative includes some major elements described on the left side of the slide here. That includes the improvement of active transportation facilities and connections throughout the corridor of the project corridor. It extends light rail transit from the current Expo Station to Evergreen Boulevard in Vancouver. It also includes express bus on shoulder through the corridor to the program area. With light rail, there will be 3 new light rail stations added. We replaced the bridges over the Columbia River as well as North Carolina Harbor. And we have modifications to the 7 interchanges in the program area. We also will include 3 through lanes in each direction, as well as 1 auxiliary lane in each direction. Also in the modified LPA, we will have a variable rate tolling for motorists that use the river crossing, and that will help with demand management. Again, the modified locally preferred alternative will be compared to the no-build alternative. That's if none of the improvements associated with the modified LPA would be implemented. but other planned projects independent of the program would proceed. And the forecast is in 2045 for that, the impacts being studied. Within our modified locally preferred alternative, we also have design options that are being studied. We have a bridge configuration that includes a movable span or single level or double level bridges. We have an option whether there's C-Street ramps included in the program, whether there is inclusion of 1 or 2 auxiliary lanes in each direction. We have park and ride locations in Vancouver that are being studied, and an alignment on I-5. Next slide. In the program area, this is an overall graphic of the 5 miles. We have 7 interchanges. North is to the top of the screen. We have, starting at the south end of the program, there's Victory Boulevard, Marine Drive interchange, Hayden Island interchange. Across the river in Vancouver, we have SR14 interchange, Mill Plain Boulevard, 4th Plain interchange, and at the top of the screen, SR500 interchange. Light rail is shown in yellow here, extending again from Expo into Vancouver. It also reflects the bus on shoulder through the program area here, as well as the shared use path. Next slide, please. There is tolling, as I mentioned, will help pay for the construction of the program area investments, as well as manage congestion. All tolling will be electronically collected with toll booths, as there will not be a need for vehicles to stop. The timeline is that for the start of tolling would be as early as 2026 after construction in the corridor begins. There is currently work being done by the transportation commissions for rate setting. Once the new bridge is in place, the pre-completion tolling would be shifted onto the new bridge to continue that tolling. Tolling is expected to be variable rate tolling, so it's know the prices before you go. And this study of the environmental impact statement, the supplemental EIS, is studying variable rates that have a range from $1.50 to $3.15 per trip. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the Oregon and Washington Transportation Commissions have been meeting, and they will be talking about, they will be actually rate setting and studying the exemptions or discounts involved in tolling. They will be setting those rates in the last 6 to 8 months before tolling begins. And again, that could be as early as 2026. Next slide, please. So it will work through the program area and provide a little bit more detail of the investments being studied. This is, it will work from south to north. So starting in Portland, this is the south end of the program. Again, north is the top of the screen. Hayden Island is also at the top of the screen. So in the lower portion of the picture, you'll see the Victory Boulevard interchange and then Marine Drive interchange. Marine Drive has a replacement interchange with a single signal on it. Moving northward to Hayden Island. Hayden Island is proposed to have ramps to and from the north that land on the south side of the island at Jansen Drive. For ramps that would come from the south side, say from downtown Portland, those would use the Marine Drive interchange, go across an arterial bridge, which is located on the east side of the improvements here, east of I-5, just slightly east there, and access the island either to or from the south. As you can see also on the left side of the picture, you see the yellow or orange colored graphic reflecting the extension of light rail from the current Expo station across North Portland Harbor, elevated across Hayden Island with a new station on Hayden Island, and then extending northward onto the river bridge. Also in the program area, you'll see the various greenish colors, and those are reflecting active transportation improvements, both with local street connections as well as shared use path connections to existing or planned facilities within the local agency jurisdiction. And I will move north to the river. Next slide, please. Across the river, now we're seeing Hayden on the south side of our screen, on the lower portion of the screen, and Vancouver in the upper portion of the screen. You see the replacement of the I-5 bridges to the west, just immediately downstream of the existing bridges. On the north side of the screen, we'll see the SR14 interchange and moving northward into Vancouver. Across the river bridge, we have both active transportation, light rail, and vehicular traffic for those replacement bridges. I have a little bit more detail coming up. In Vancouver, you see the transit exiting the bridge on the orange color again, with a waterfront station right near the bridgehead, and then moving northward towards Evergreen. Also, you can see in the green colors again, active transportation connecting down off of the bridge, connecting to the local network east-west and north-south within the program area. Next slide, please. This is giving you some additional information about the existing interstate bridge, the cross section of the current bridge as it sits today. You can see there are 3 through lanes of traffic in each direction, both northbound and southbound. Some of the things to point out, they are very narrow lanes. There are no shoulders on the bridge in either direction. And in addition to that, you have these sidewalks on the outside of the bridge that are very narrow. Additionally, with the bridge as it currently sits in the bridge lift, we experience on average about 257 stoppages in a year. That's whether the bridge is lifting or for maintenance of the bridge itself. Next slide, please. So for the bridge options, we talked about 3 different configurations of the river bridge itself. This is reflecting a cross section of the double deck bridge fixed span. In the double deck, vehicular traffic is on the upper deck for the 2 bridges, northbound on the right there. Under the northbound bridge, it reflects active transportation and other use for corridors such as utilities. On the southbound bridge, we reflect the vehicular traffic on the upper deck and light rail transit on the lower deck. Next slide, please. This is the single level fixed span cross section. Now this is at single level, that means all modes are at the same level across the bridge cross section. So you see the vehicular traffic and the active transportation on that northbound bridge. Same thing for the southbound bridge. You see the vehicular traffic and then the light rail transit on that outbound bridge. One other note is on the inside shoulder, you can see representation of a bus on shoulder in each direction. The graphical depictions or the pictures on the right reflect a couple of different bridge types under a single level type bridge. Next slide. And this last bridge configuration is for single level movable span. Again, for single level, all of the modes are at the same level going across the river. This pictures on the right reflect the bridge in the closed position or lifted position so that river traffic can navigate through the lift span, and then the closed position in the lower graphic. Next slide, please. Moving more northward into Vancouver. As I mentioned, the light rail crossing the river with the waterfront station, elevated station, and then also the Evergreen station, which would be the terminus of light rail just out there of Evergreen Boulevard. Also reflecting an active transportation community connector in that vicinity, just immediately south of Evergreen Boulevard. This also reflects options for the C Street ramps, as well as the westward shift of I-5, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Next slide, please. So the C Street ramps, our analysis would include the option of the C Street ramps in order to better reflect a range of impacts, whether the ramps are actually replaced or that they're not replaced in the proposed improvements. It gives an idea between the different level of impacts being studied to resources in the program area. And you can see those reflected in the purple here on the screen. Next slide, please. Next, we're talking about the I-5 westward shift. Again, this is studying a range of impacts if I-5 is replaced more centered on the alignment that it currently sits in, or with a more westward shift, moving more of the impacts slightly to the west with the improvements. Next slide, please. And the last option that's in this area for what's being studied is our locations of park and rides. So there are currently identified 5 different potential locations, 3 locations for a potential park and ride at the waterfront. You see they're listed as PNR 1A, 1B, and 1C. And then in the upper portion of the picture, you see 2 other possible locations for a park and ride that would serve the Evergreen Station. Those are listed as PNR 2B or 2A. So the park and ride location options. Next slide, please, as we move northward. Mill Plain interchange is at the bottom of the screen, and then Fourth Plain at the top of the screen. The improvements being proposed in the area include, of course, active transportation, as well as there are some connection improvements for both the interchanges, such as the northbound off-ramp that goes to Fourth Plain Boulevard would be just south of Mill Plain into a collector distributor. And again, working with the local community on what those investments would be for active transportation through the corridor. And next slide, please. At the north end of our program area, this is the SR 500 interchange. And one point of note here is that in the southbound direction, there's a proposed braided ramp system that again is intended to increase the operations and safety for the program area by separating movements between the ramps for SR 500 as they come on to I-5 versus the southbound I-5 connections to Fourth Plain Boulevard. And next slide, please. The other, I guess the last remaining option that I wanted to cover was the number of auxiliary lanes. This graphic represents these auxiliary lanes are the ramp-to-ramp connections, reflecting whether there's one auxiliary lane across the river or 2. And so you can see in the graphics the difference between where those connections are made. And again, the connections made to help the operations and safety through the program area. And with that, I believe I'm handing it over to Ryan Prowse, our transportation lead.
Thank you, Casey. Just as a reminder, we are happy to take your questions at the end of the presentation. And in order to do that, you could go to the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom menu bar. So please get those questions in and we will be ready to answer them at the end of our presentation. And I'll turn it over to Ryan LaProuse.
Thanks, Kimberly. Yes, again, Ryan LaProuse, Transportation Planning Lead. I'm going to cover some of the transportation findings that you can find in the draft supplemental EIS. Next slide. So starting off with existing safety conditions, there was almost 1,800 crashes that occurred during the 5-year period from 2015 to 2019 on the I-5, the ramps and the ramp intersections within the program area. During the 5-year period, there were 7 fatal crashes and 17 serious injury crashes. Most of these were due to short merging, diverging weaving areas, the limited shoulders, the congestion, and the bridge lifts all kind of contribute to those high number of crashes that we have in our program area. Next slide. In 2045, the no-build alternative is forecast to increase crashes by about 28% over current conditions. And the modified LPA with one auxiliary lane or the modified LPA with two auxiliary lanes are both supposed to reduce crashes between 13 and 17% compared to the no-build due to the geometric changes that Casey kind of went over, as well as the auxiliary lanes, CD roadways, lane widths, and full shoulders. Next slide. Next, I'm going to talk about average daily person trips on the Columbia River bridges. This graphic shows the number of people crossing the river by mode. So it covers in vehicles, in freight, transit, and then active transportation, including walk, bike, and rolling. Daily person throughput across the I-5 Interstate Bridge is forecast to increase by about 30% with the 2045 no build compared to existing conditions. And then the modified LPA with one auxiliary lane or two auxiliary lanes are both supposed to increase by about 4% compared to the no build condition. The increase in daily person throughput with the modified LPA and design options compared to the no build is due to the increase in transit and the active transportation facilities, as well as the variable rate tolling that Casey mentioned earlier. Next slide. Next, I'm going to go into the average weekday vehicle trips on the I-5 Columbia River bridges. In 2019, under the existing conditions, there's about 143,000 average weekday vehicle trips across the bridge. In 2045, that is going to increase by about 26% to around 180,000 average weekday. And then the modified LPA with one aux and two aux will reduce that by about 3% due to the investment in high capacity transit, including LRT, as Casey mentioned, that was being extended across the river from Expo to the Evergreen area, the express bus on shoulder improvements, new park and ride lots throughout the program area, variable rate tolls, and the improvements to the bridges and improved active transportation facilities. Next slide. Next, I'm going to go into travel times for vehicles. So travel times are calculated as trips between the I-5, I-205 interchange near Salmon Creek and the I-5, I-405 interchange in North Portland along I-5. So this is showing during the kind of southbound AM, which is the critical peak period for the southbound travelers, and the northbound PM, which is the critical time period. And again, it's kind of showing the 2-hour average travel time within those 4-hour AM and 4-hour PM peak periods. So the peak period and off-peak period travel times are both shown to decrease compared to the no build. The critical AM period here is southbound AM again shown. It's going to decrease from the no build of 58 minutes by about 7% down to 54 minutes with the MLPA with one auxiliary lane, and down to about 50 minutes with the MLPA with two auxiliary lanes. The decrease in travel time on the modified LPA is again attributed to the program components, including the auxiliary lanes, the collector distributor, interchange and freeway geometric improvements, transit improvements, and variable rate tolling. While the southbound improvements are minor, there will still be bottlenecks south of the program area down near the I-5 split that will meter and kind of limit that travel time improvement. The northbound travel time will show a bigger improvement. As you can see, it reduces from 42 minutes in the northbound PM under the no build to about 26 minutes or 14 minutes for the modified LPA with one aux or two aux. And this is a 40 to 67% improvement compared to the no build alternative. Next slide. Next, I'm going to talk about the hours of daily congestion at the I-5 Columbia River bridges. So the hours of congestion is speeds that are under 45 miles per hour. And we kind of summarize that at the bridge for both northbound and southbound on a daily condition. So the southbound congestion at the bridge in the no build condition is forecast to be about 16 hours. It'll start at 5 a.m. and last until 9 p.m. So pretty much all day, except for the overnight hours. And then the northbound congestion of the bridge in the no build is forecast to last 14 hours from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Current congestion at the bridge 10 hours combined, northbound and southbound. So it's still kind of focused on the AM peak and for southbound and PM peak for northbound. But as you can see in the no build condition 2045, that is extending to almost all of the day for both directions. So in the southbound direction, the bottleneck of the Columbia River bridges would improve under the modified LPA compared to the no build, improving southbound traffic flow at the Columbia River bridges. Southbound daily congestion is reduced from 16 hours the no build to 4.5 or 4.75 hours for the MLPA with 1 aux or 2 aux condition. And then in the northbound direction, the bottleneck of the Columbia River bridge will be reduced as well from 14 hours, but only to about 9 hours with the MLPA and about 6 hours with the MLPA with 2 auxiliary lanes. The Columbia River bridges would still be a bottleneck, but it would be reducing that congestion to kind of the afternoon versus the all-day period. The MLPA, the congestion is backing up to the I-5, I-405 split down in North Portland. But with the MLPA with 2 aux lanes, that reduction would be down to 6 hours, but it would reduce to only back to about Marine Drive, so be very focused on near the bridge. Next slide. Next, I'm going to get into transit travel times. So we studied travel times for transit for each mode of transit. As Casey identified earlier, there's light rail extension from the Expo Center to the Evergreen Boulevard. And then there was express bus enhancements using the bus on shoulder operations. So those travel times are included here as well. The travel times here for the origin destination pairs from downtown Vancouver near the Evergreen Boulevard to the Pioneer Courthouse Square in downtown Portland. The total transit travel time includes time spent waiting, as well as, which is about 10 minutes combined walk time on either end of the trip, and the waiting time. So that's in those travel times. So under the modified LPA and the design options, light rail transit travel time is about 47 minutes. For the express bus, the southbound AM express bus, the modified LPA and design options will be 59 minutes compared to 48 minutes with the no build. While the southbound bottleneck at the Columbia River Bridge will be reduced under the modified LPA and options compared to the no build, the improved southbound flows at the Columbia River Bridge would increase the extent and duration of downstream bottlenecks approaching the I-5 and I-405 split, with congestion spilling back into the program area. The southbound AM peak movements between Vancouver and the Rose Quarter or downtown Portland, the LRT times are not impacted by that congestion on I-5. The northbound PM Express bus is forecast to be about 45 minutes with the MLPA and about 33 minutes with the MLPA with 2 auxiliary lanes. These are again compared to the no build time, which is 67 minutes for that travel time pair. The round trip express bus time, so southbound AM and northbound PM, would be about 10 to 20% faster with the modified LPA and design options compared to the no build condition. Next slide. My last slide here is to cover transit ridership and kind of passenger miles. So daily transit ridership is forecast to increase almost 100% under the modified LPA and design options compared to the no build. These new riders would be important due to a shift in transit because of the extension of LRT between Expo Center and Evergreen, the new park and ride lots, and improvements to the speed and frequency of the express bus service crossing the river, as well as the variable rate tolling on the Columbia River bridges. Next, on the right of this slide, talks about kind of passenger miles, or the distance people travel on transit. It's kind of a transit VMT of vehicle miles traveled in transit. So the number of passenger miles occurring within transit inclusive right-of-way is just one metric that we've used to kind of calculate transit reliability. So again, the extension of the L line from Expo Center north to the new terminus at Evergreen on I-5 would be completely in its own guideway, and the new shoulder proposed as part of the modified LPA would provide bus on shoulder operations that are reserved for express buses. So these are both contributing to this large increase in exclusive right-of-way transit VMT. So modified LPA and design options increase passenger miles almost 200% compared to the no build alternative. And that's my last slide. And I forgot to mention on the bottom of each of these slides, it kind of shows a section in the technical report or the EIS that you can go find that information. So now I'll pass it off to the next presenter.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm going to continue talking about the findings of the draft supplemental environmental impact statement. All of the information I discuss can be found in Chapter 3 of the draft SEIS, which I encourage you to review if you would like to learn more about a particular subject. And like Ryan said, each slide identifies which exact section the information can be found in. Next slide. The modified locally preferred alternative, or modified LPA, is expected to impact and benefit marine navigation on the Columbia River in the following ways. Benefits include reducing the number of in-water piers and increasing the space between piers, known as the horizontal navigation clearance, to 400 feet. Switching the locations of the navigation channels, which I'll discuss in a future slide. Improving the ability for vessels to move through the navigation channel by reducing the number of directional changes vessels need to make, and increasing the seismic resiliency by reducing the risk of bridge failure or collapse. However, because the bridge would be built to the west of the existing bridge, which would make it closer to the BNSF railway bridge, it would slightly reduce the available distance for vessels to align between the two bridges. There would also be some changes in the vertical navigation clearance, which would be the height for vessels to pass under the bridge, which I'll explain in the next slide. Next slide. This graphic shows all of the bridge configurations superimposed onto one graphic, looking west towards the bridge. On your left is Hayden Island, and on your right is Vancouver, Washington. The black dashed line shows the profile of the existing interstate bridge. The double-deck fixed-span bridge is shown by the solid dark blue line. Its upper deck is probably the clearest to see on this graphic, but its lower deck, where transit and the shared use path would be located, would be the same height as the single-level fixed-span bridge, which is represented by the dashed teal line. Both the double-deck and single-level fixed-span bridges would provide 116 feet of vertical navigation clearance over the primary navigation channel for marine vessels to pass under the bridge. The single-level movable span bridge, shown in the maroon color, would provide 178 feet of vertical navigation clearance in the open position over the primary navigation channel, which is the same clearance that the existing bridge provides today. All these bridge configuration options would provide a higher vertical navigation clearance than the existing bridge in the closed position. Next slide. This graphic shows how the navigation channels would be relocated. The top image shows the existing locations of the navigation channels, and the lower image shows how the location of the primary navigation channel, which is shown in yellow, would be shifted to the middle, and the barge channels would be located to its north and south. Next slide. This project, like many projects, requires acquisition of additional land. We are looking at acquiring approximately 47 acres throughout the 5-mile corridor to construct the modified LPA. Depending on design option, there are additional acquisitions. Sometimes it's a small addition like 0.1 or 0.2 acres, but some of the park and ride location options could require up to 3 acres. As a result of these acquisitions, the project would displace approximately 43 residential units, 36 businesses, and 1 public use site. The I-5 westward shift in downtown Vancouver would require displacing 3 additional businesses and 1 additional apartment complex that contains 33 residential units. The IBR program understands the impact that acquisitions and displacements have on the residents of these homes and units, as well as the business owners. And on the next slide, I will describe where we are in the right-of-way process. Next slide. Right now, we are at a conceptual level of design. The IBR program will do everything feasible to avoid and minimize potential impacts to property. No final decisions have been made about what will be built, and there are still several steps remaining before discussions about specific property impacts take place. Discussions with individually impacted property owners will begin after we complete the environmental process. Next slide. The modified LPA is expected to impact and benefit the economy in several ways. Benefits include improved freight mobility and faster travel times, which improves economic opportunities for everyone. Impacts include a reduction in property tax revenue due to the displacement of residential units and businesses. Additionally, the displacement of 36 businesses would impact approximately 616 jobs. Depending on design options, there could be an increase in the number of businesses displaced and the number of associated jobs that are impacted. However, it is anticipated that project construction would result in additional economic benefits, such as an increase of employment and spending within the area. For every $1 billion in construction spent, we're expected to see approximately 5,500 direct jobs, such as construction jobs, and almost 11,000 indirect jobs, such as service providers and restaurant jobs. Next slide. There's a presidential executive order that requires federal agencies to look at impacts to environmental justice communities, or EJ for short. EJ communities include low-income populations and minority populations. Based on the program's EJ analysis, EJ populations would experience impacts and benefits similar to those for the general population, such as increased access to high-capacity transit, active transportation, and reductions in vehicle travel times, increased access to jobs due to those faster travel times, and improved air quality. However, like the general population, EJ populations would experience impacts such as increased traffic and noise impacts from construction. EJ populations may experience a disproportionately high and adverse impact compared to the overall population. These potential impacts include the costs of tolling, displacements in EJ areas, and potential impacts to cultural resources that are important to those EJ communities. Next slide. Like environmental justice, the equity analysis looks at specific populations within our program area. The equity priority communities include Black, Indigenous, and people of color or BIPOC, tribal governments, people with disabilities, communities with limited English proficiency, persons with lower income, houseless individuals and families, immigrants and refugees, young people, and older adults. The equity analysis looked at the impact for travel time due to increased access to high-capacity transit and active transportation. High-capacity transit could be the light rail transit system as well as the express bus on shoulder. We saw that equity priority communities saw reductions in travel time because of those alternative modes of transportation, and that also leads to an increased access to jobs due to those faster travel times. We understand, similar to EJ, that some residential displacements could impact some of our equity priority communities potentially more adversely than the general population. In addition, tolling transportation costs and construction impacts could disproportionately impact equity priority communities. Next slide. We also looked at how noise levels could change as a result of the modified LPA being constructed. For highway impacts under the no-build alternative, noise modeling showed 215 sites would exceed highway noise thresholds without the modified LPA being constructed. With the modified LPA being constructed, it is anticipated that slightly fewer sites would exceed highway noise thresholds, with 198 sites. The graphic to the right shows a map of the locations for potential sound walls. This and other similar maps are available in the Draft SEIS. Transit noise impacts are mostly related to the proposed light rail system. Due to the light rail extension, there would be about 12 new receptors that would be affected at a moderate level for transit noise. And there would be 12 new residences and 1 theater that would experience transit vibration impacts associated with the light rail system. Next slide. To evaluate visual impacts, the program has created several simulations and renderings. The Draft SEIS contains many more simulations, which I encourage you to look at. On this slide, the left set of images are from Hayden Island looking west. The existing bridge is shown in the top left image, the double-deck fixed span in the middle image, and the single-level movable span on the bottom image. The single-level fixed span could look similar as the single-level movable span, but without the lift towers. The right set of images shows what a vehicle might see while driving north on the bridge towards Vancouver. The top image shows the existing bridge, the middle image shows the top level of the double-deck fixed span bridge, and the bottom image shows the single-level movable span where the lift towers would be located. Next slide. These renderings show the Fort Vancouver National Historic Site. The top left image shows the existing bridge in the distance, and you can see the existing lift towers are visible behind the tree line. The bottom left image shows the double-deck fixed span configuration, and the images on the right show the single-level movable span configuration. The top image shows the lift span in the closed position, and the bottom image shows the lift span in the open position. Next slide. For parks and recreation, the map on the right shows all of the existing parks and recreation facilities in the program area. The IBR program would acquire approximately 1.3 acres of park and recreation facilities and would reconstruct or permanently realign approximately 5,800 linear feet of trails. The program would also improve transit access to park and recreation resources within the program area. Next slide. The term cultural resources refers to sites, buildings, structures, objects, and districts, which also include traditional cultural properties, historic properties of religious and cultural significance to Native tribes, and cultural landscapes. The area of potential effect, or APE, is the geographic area or areas that the IBR program used to identify cultural resources. It was defined by creating a 100-foot buffer from the project footprint to account for potential effects to the identified historic properties. Based on the analysis, 2 of the 15 previously recorded archaeological sites in the APE have the potential to be impacted by construction-related physical ground disturbance. For above-ground cultural resources, the modified LPA would result in adverse effects to 12 historic built environment resources. These resources could include historic buildings, bridges, and other types of architectural structures. Next slide. So next, I'll talk about the environmental findings of the draft SEIS. Next slide. The climate change section of the draft SEIS identifies the climate conditions in the region, highlights federal and state policy and regulations on climate, identifies the potential long-term climate impacts from the modified LPA, and provides potential mitigation measures for unavoidable effects. Based on the analysis, the modified LPA would have the following benefits and impacts to climate change compared to the no-build alternative. Increased mode share of low and zero emission modes like transit and active transportation, lower energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions in 2045 due in part to the mode shift, but also consistent with national trends and regulations, and improvement in climate resilience with materials and design. Next slide. Right now, most of the roadways, including the main line I-5, is not treated for stormwater runoff. One of the major improvements of the IBR program would be collecting stormwater, capturing it, detaining it, and treating it before it moves into our groundwater or surface waters like the Columbia River. So the IBR program would be looking at treating nearly 200 acres of impervious surface. Next slide. Ecosystems are communities of organisms and the habitat that support those communities. There are several aquatic species and terrestrial resources in the program area and several regulatory conditions with which the program needs to comply with, especially when constructing a bridge in the Columbia River. The IBR program will be looking at minimizing impacts. There will be mitigation and habitat restoration as part of that effort to minimize the overall net impact of the program on the environment. Next slide. Temporary construction impacts are short-term effects that would occur during construction. For the IBR program, temporary construction impacts would include noise, dust in the air, delays on the roadways, and detours, which could impact access to businesses in the area. In addition to permanent acquisitions, there could be some temporary acquisitions, also known as temporary construction easements. And lastly, visual quality could be impacted during construction due to heavy machinery and signage. Next slide. So as we continue to move forward, the IBR program is always looking to avoid impacts wherever possible. When impacts cannot be avoided, the IBR program will try to minimize those impacts as much as possible. Regulatory compliance efforts are currently underway. And I think that wraps up the summary of community and environmental findings in the draft SEIS. I'll pass it over to Hannah Williams to continue the presentation.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening and for listening and learning. Now we want to talk to you about how you can take this information and comment. Tonight, we're not taking comments. We are taking your questions and want to respond to them, but we want to make sure you know about the official ways to get your comment on the record. So now is really the time to comment. Our comment period runs through November 18th. And commenting really matters. This is your opportunity to learn more about the findings, the benefits, the project footprint, the impacts, and tell us what you think, what matters. So there are a few things that you should know. So I'm going to read them on the slide here because they're really important. So we need you to comment through our official channels. And on the next slide, I'm going to walk you through that on how to do it. Comments submitted through social social media and informal conversations, they will not be recorded as formal comments. So you need to use the channels that we have on the next slide. And you are able to include attachments in your emails. And I'm going to read specifically the rules for that so that we make sure that we get exactly, we understand exactly what you're attaching and why, and how it relates to your comment, what you want us to know about the attachment that you're including. So it's really important for us to be super specific on that. So just a little more guidance on that is that written comments should not include any hyperlinks to outside materials or information. And any material information the commenter wishes to have considered should be included within the submitted comment. Attachments must be specifically referenced in the comment text, including specific citations to page numbers and passages from the attachments. We really want to know what you want us to look at and what the connection is to the technical analysis, to your comment. Help us so we can really understand what you're trying to tell us. All audio and video attachments must be transcribed or submitted via the Draft SEIS voicemail line. Wonderful. So let's get to the next slide to go over the different ways that you can comment. So ways that you can comment, you can use our comment form on the website. You can send an email to the Draft SEIS website. You can call our voicemail line. You can, thank you. You can submit a comment at our public hearing in person. And we will also have virtual public hearings. Wonderful. So those are the official comment channels. And I also want to go back one slide. My apologies. We have this information available a few different ways. So you can go on the website. You can look at the Draft SEIS document, the technical reports. We have an executive summary. There's also videos on our website. We also have printed copies of the Draft SEIS. So the hard copies, they're in a couple locations in Washington and in Oregon. We have them at the IBR offices. We have them at Vancouver City Hall, Vancouver Community Library, the Charles Jordan Community Center, the Portland Building, downtown on Fifth Avenue. Another resource to not only get information, but to also ask your questions, to speak with an expert are our office hours. And so you can sign up through our website for office hours, and we'll be hosting those. So please do that if you have more questions after tonight. We want to help. There's also tools online for you to help search the document to help find what you're looking for. So thank you. Thanks for your time, and I'll pass it off to you, Kimberly.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for our presentation. We're now to the question and answer portion of our presentation. And as a reminder, if we're unable to get to your question tonight, we invite you to follow up with us by email or join us, set up an office hours appointment, and we'll be happy to talk with you. So our first question comes in is, what is the footprint of the bridge replacement for the Oregon side, including ramps, light rail supports to both the east and the west of the bridge? What is the impact overall of the bridge on Halen Island residents? And Casey, we will turn this over to you to respond to.
Thanks, Kimberly. Yeah, the footprint is really covered in a variety of different ways. The proposed investments are all described and included in the Draft SEIS document themselves. There was a slide earlier that summarized the technical areas that are being evaluated within the document, and each of those sections in the document that describe the full impacts related to the proposed investments. So All of that information would be included in the document, and I might ask if there's anything to add, Chris.
I think you did great.
Thank you, Casey. Our next question. The Just Crossing Alliance created a public comment form that allows file attachments, unlike the IBR's official form. Will the IBR program accept SEIS comments submitted through our form as valid public input? We've asked previously, but have received no response. Hannah, could you please answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kimberly. Hi, we want you to comment. We do need you to submit your comments through the IBR official channels for our comment period. So please go to the website. You can do it through our comment form. You can do it through email. You can do it in person. You can use the voicemail line. You can submit a letter. You can use a court reporter. We also have the virtual public hearings. You are able to submit attachments, but we do need you to use our form and any of these other ways to submit an official channel so we can get it recorded.
Thank you, Hannah. Our next question, will there be a traffic bridge built between Hayden Island and Vancouver west of the bridge and east of the RR, I'm assuming Railroad Bridge? And Casey, we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to assume that this question is discussing the possibility of a different bridge than what's being proposed in the program. Again, our program is proposing to invest in replacement bridge of I-5 immediately west of the existing bridges. There is no study of in our draft supplemental EIS for a different bridge that it would be further west than this. So I believe the answer is no to the question that's being asked.
All right, thank you. Our next question, there are some 4,000 Hayden Island residents, many of whom are lower and fixed incomes. I'm assuming that means on lower and fixed incomes. How will the tolling be modified for these individuals? And Shilpa.
Thank you, Kimberly. So the IVR program, we do include tolling, but we are not setting the rates or policy for the tolling. That is being set by the transportation commissions on both sides in Oregon and Washington. They do have a subcommittee that is meeting regularly, and they have meetings that are available to the public. They're streamed live, and they're also taking public comment during those meetings. So they will be the ones setting the policy as well as the rates for the tolling on the bridge.
Okay, thank you. Will the final SEIS identify how properties listed under acquisitions and displacements will be impacted? Specifically, what portions of the properties will be fully or partially taken or temporarily impacted during construction? And if the impact is temporary, will the document indicate the duration and the dates? And Chris, we'll turn that over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Kimberly. So we've identified impacts in the draft supplemental EIS. We're going to continue to refine those, take comments, and as we move forward through the final supplemental, into design, and then into construction phases, we're going to continue to look for opportunities to avoid and minimize those impacts. You know, we'll know the duration and for the temporary closures when we get closer to construction. It's just too early right now. There's a lot that has to play out. We're going to continue to engage the public and impacted properties so that we communicate those impacts. And we'll also have some more opportunity for conversation and communication at the public hearing coming up if you want to talk to real estate professionals.
Thank you, Chris. Our next question. The draft SEIS discusses construction phasing and potential casting sites identified during later phases. Are those potential sites listed under acquisitions and displacements, or will additional locations be determined during the construction phase? And Casey, we'll have you answer that question.
Great, thanks. Yeah, the sites that are proposed to be included for investments, and that includes sites that may be used during construction, are included in the draft SEIS. And so the potential impacts are being reflected as shown. If there was a need through our development down the road in time for other sites, and as indicated by contractors in the future, they would need to go through a process to also clear and permit any proposed future sites for that use.
Thank you, Casey. Will the slides from this presentation be sent to us, and will a recording be posted for us? So these slides will be posted along with the recording on our website, probably tomorrow morning. It'll be posted on our webpage on the calendar section under today's date. So our next question reads, the graphic shows the river as if it's at a static level. Is there a way to show what the water levels look like during spring, an atmospheric river with sea level rise and with operational changes as a result of the expiration of the flood control agreement with Canada? Will it really be tall enough to guarantee 116 feet of clearance 100% of the time? And we will have Chris answer this question.
And people can jump in too. So if other people want to provide rounded answers to this, but the draft supplemental has analyzed all of those different scenarios, and the conversations that we've had with the Corps of Engineers, with the drainage district, and the affected users are incorporating those considerations. What we showed today was just one picture. We have additional figures that talk about the different levels and how we've considered it. And I think an important thing in your question there is, like you said, this is a estuarine environment, which means it's impacted by tides. And so as we're looking at clearance, we're working with the U.S. Coast Guard to ensure reasonable navigation, which doesn't mean that it'll always be accessible at 116 feet, but that it will reasonably be accessible at the right time with the rivers, and that it's not going to cause impacts to the river users. And again, we're having those conversations. We've got the diagrams, and we've done the analysis in our draft EIS for you to look at.
Thank you, Chris. And I believe there is a follow-up to this question. As the Army Corps of Engineers rebuilds the dredge Yaquina in 2030 to 2035, how tall will the new mast be? Will 116 feet be tall enough for the new dredge to be able to pass under the bridge?
Yeah, not so. It's same thing. We're continuing to have. We've started having conversations very early in planning for the Interstate Bridge Replacement program. We continue to have those conversations. I don't have the specifics on how high the boom's going to be, but they are engaged. We're having routine conversation, and we are all focused to ensure that the Corps of Engineers, who maintains federal navigation through this area, is not impacted by the bridge.
Great, thank you. Okay, so after this project is complete, how many hours of traffic congestion will there be on I-5? And Ryan, we'll turn this over to you.
Thank you. As we kind of showed, the hours of congestion with the modified LPA, one auxiliary lane or two auxiliary lanes would be between about 10.5 to 13.75 hours compared to the no build condition, which is about 30 hours. So again, these are 2045 projections. So remember, we're out into 2045 future year time period.
Thank you, Ryan. Our next question. Has anyone met with the residents in Vancouver who would have their homes taken by eminent domain, had a group meeting with IBR yet? If not, why and when will that happen? And Casey, we'll turn that over to you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, the draft SEIS is really the first indication that there could be potential impacts to property owners. So one of the things we did with the draft is make sure that those potentially affected property owners were notified. The second part of that is, of course, we're looking for feedback from the community through our comment period. And then working towards our final SEIS, we'll be looking still to and towards construction to either avoid or minimize those impacts to property owners. We look forward to working with those property owners to make sure that they have a full understanding of what the proposed investments are, what the potential impacts are, and hearing their feedback and working with them towards any final discussions around acquisitions, et cetera.
Great. This next question relates to access to and from Hayden Island. Do I understand correctly that if I want to drive to Hayden Island from Portland, I must take an exit for Vancouver and then get back onto I-5 and head south to get to the Hayden Island exit? And Shilpa, we'll have you answer this question.
Thank you, Kimberly. That is not the case. So if you're traveling from Portland, south of Hayden Island, trying to access Hayden Island, the exit would be at Marine Drive. There'll be a separate, you'll be exiting along Marine Drive traffic. There'll be a separate exit, and you'll have to take the new RTL bridge, the local bridge connecting North Portland and Hayden Island, and that'll give us access to Hayden Island. And reverse, while going from Hayden Island to south of Portland, that's the same pathway. We take the RTL bridge and go to the ramp that's at Marine Drive to access I-5 South going into Portland.
Great, thank you. Okay, with that, those are the questions that we have received and are able to answer this evening. If you have a follow-up question or something that we have not been able to cover this evening, we again welcome you to send us an email or set up an in-person or virtual office hours appointment where you can talk directly with a technical expert. We want to thank you again for joining us today. We have in-person events coming up next week for public hearings and to learn more about the program, and a virtual hearing coming up as well. So join us at our website, interstatebridge.org, to learn more. And we want to thank you for joining us this evening, and have a great night. Thank you.